Dear God, as we gather together again, we are grateful to be here, to be reminded what a blessing it is to be in an extended family under your love. Amen. So, as Calvin read to us, according to Luke's gospel, Jesus had spent the whole night in prayer. Come morning, he found himself surrounded by folks who wanted to hear from him. Some were already sold on him. Some were still making up their minds, though. All of them had heard, in fact, of his power, how all you had to do was get near him and demons would fly off you. If you had a fever, he'd make it go away. And if your leg didn't work, he could probably fix it. Some said he could even help your business, because there was a story that we, in fact, looked into here last Sunday where Peter and Andrew take him out in their boat and they catch more fish than they can even get into the boat itself. So everyone's crowding around. And he doesn't seem to mind because even though it wears on him, he loves the people and gives himself to them anyway. So he sits down and asks them to sit too, because he has something he wants to tell them. And what came out of his mouth were those things that scholars call Beatitudes. Now, it was a common enough form in Jesus' day. He did not invent it. People had heard these all their lives, a simple two-part thing summing up common knowledge about how to live the best life. In their most generic form, they go something like this. Blessed are you who have 401ks. You won't go hungry in your later years. Or blessed are you who floss, for you shall keep your teeth. So the form of what Jesus was saying was very familiar to them, but the content that Jesus used to fill this familiar form rocked them. It blew some of them away. He said things like, blessed are you who are poor. Blessed are you who are hungry. Blessed are you who weep now. Blessed are you when people hate you, revile you, exclude you, forget to send you a Valentine. Hearing this was like being handed a glass of lemonade on a summer's day, sipping it and finding out it's really vinegar. It was a shocking substitution of bad things for good. Blessedness, then, according to Jesus, was equated with those things that people were doing their best to avoid: poverty, hunger, grief. And in every case, Jesus made those equations stronger by tagging on a reversal of fortune. Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled. Matthew's gospel also contains this form, but Luke adds to the Beatitudes a few woeitudes. These were mirror images of the Beatitudes in which woe is equated with what people do their best to achieve, right? Wealth, food, laughter, esteem. So in the same way that Jesus had first made the bad things sound good, now he makes the good things sound bad. But since you and I are so used to hearing these sayings, the surprise and the edge that they had originally is missing. We can't hear it. He said, blessed are you. If he had said, blessed are you who have cancer, for you shall be made whole, or blessed are you whose prayers are not answered, for you shall one day see God face to face. And then on the flip side said, woe to you who drive a turbocharged sports car, for you shall one day walk on foot. Or woe to you with college degrees, for you already have received your reward. We'd get it, right? We'd get the edge he's intending. And so the impact of these woes and blessings has everything to do with how your life is going when you hear them. If you're hungry, this Jesus stuff sounds pretty good. And if you're used to eating steak or sushi, you don't want to hear it. So what I'm saying is that when we hear such good news, we normally file it away with all the other nice Christian advice that no one we know personally will ever follow. But what I want you to know is that these things have nothing whatever to do with advice. Jesus is not telling people what he thinks they should do. I mean, look, when Jesus gives advice, it's hard to miss. He says stuff like, don't waste time worrying. Look at the lilies of the field. Or, love your enemies. Or, bless those who curse you. That's all advice. The Beatitudes are not advice. They are what make Jesus, Jesus. In the Beatitudes, Jesus is just describing different kinds of people, hoping that his listeners will actually recognize themselves. And then he makes a promise to all of them that the way things are now, in the present, will not be the way things will always be. Let me make that clear, because this is actually the heart of his message. Life, according to Jesus, is like the medieval symbol of the cycle of life. It's a great wheel of fortune, not to be mistaken with Pat Sajak. It just keeps moving around and around. And Jesus' point is simply that those at the top of the wheel, those with the wind blowing in their hair, with things going really well for them, they will eventually have their turn at the bottom. And those at the bottom, in the mud and the mire, will one day fly with the eagles. They may not think so. Being at the bottom is debilitating, but things can change even when you are there in the pit. So again, his teaching is not advice. It's not even judgment. It is simply the truth about life, yours and mine, produced by someone who empathizes with everyone, no matter where they find themselves on the great wheel. And this is where we all get confused about Jesus. What trips us up about this is the blessing and woe language. Whenever we hear words like blessing and woe, we automatically think reward and punishment, as if he was some great judge. And we think, gee, Jesus would say that something's wrong with us if we weren't at the bottom. That's not the case. Again, I said he empathizes with people on top and the bottom both. Barbara Brown Taylor, who put me onto this idea that Jesus is not Ann Landers, has said that the Beatitudes do not tell us what to do. They tell us who we are. And more importantly, they tell us who Jesus is. Now, if someone had come out to hear Jesus because they thought he was the winning ticket in the lottery, well, they should go home. Because what he had to say would not help them get to the top of the wheel or stay on top forever, which is what a lot of people want. Ironically, there are plenty of churches, though, with 1,000 members or more, where they will tell you that Jesus wants you to be on top of the wheel, and he will keep you there forever. Just come back next Sunday, we'll tell you how. Which is, of course, why they have 1,000 members and why we're hanging out here the way we are, right? Seriously, no one gets to stay at the top of the wheel forever, right? Everything that goes around comes around, as my grandmother loved to say. Now, again, this is not advice. It is not judgment. It's just the way things work. And of course, this is important, it does offer hope to those at the bottom. Anna Kamienska has written a wonderful poem for those on the bottom, and it's called Those Who Carry. Those who carry grand pianos to the 10th floor, wardrobes and coffins, the old man with a bundle of wood hobbling beyond the horizon, the woman with the hump of nettles, the lunatic pushing her baby carriage full of empty vodka bottles. They all will be raised up, like a seagull feather, like a dry leaf, like eggshell, or scraps of newspaper. Blessed are those who carry, for they will be raised. Well, that poem echoes for me a very defining moment in my own life. One year during my time in theological seminary, I took a job as a furniture delivery man in Marin County, California. Now, that was hard work. But the day that was most defining for me was the day when we went into San Francisco to deliver a really long hide-a-bed. And we took it up to an apartment in a project somewhere. And of course, the apartment was on the top floor, and there was no elevator. We had to carry this hide-a-bed. They're made of iron, you know, iron. We had to carry this hide-a-bed up a fire escape, 4 floors. And I was on the bottom. And when we got to the outside door on the top floor, the words "Kill Whitey" were written on the wall. They live in my memory. And I remember thinking, well, I can only go up from this moment. Blessed are those who carry grand pianos to the 10th floor, for they will be raised. I was never a stranger to hard manual labor growing up. In fact, it got to be kind of an issue for me when I got to high school, because I was always painting or roofing or mowing lawns for a few dollars. But I had this friend named Paul who lived around the corner from me in our comfortable California middle-class suburb. My friend's Paul's mother had gone to Stanford. His father had not, and there was a feeling in their house that his mother had undermarried. But Paul would fix that for them because he was going to go to Stanford. That was decided before he was born. Paul was not allowed to do manual labor. He was fine with that too. He did things like, that didn't occur to me to do. He spent the entire week before the SATs at home studying for them. I didn't know that you could do that, that you could study for the SATs. But then I lived totally outside of his world and his mother's world. Yes, my parents wanted me to go to college, but that was all they said. You're going to college. They hadn't gone themselves, and they didn't have the first idea how to get there, so it was up to me. So I went to Whitworth College in Spokane, Washington, a little Presbyterian school some friends of mine had gone to and loved. And there was nothing special about it. It was just a generic church-related college, and it was easy to get into. You just applied and paid your tuition. But I went there at a good time. Desperate to survive, that school had taken a chance and hired a very progressive new president, an executive with North American Rockwell, to run the school. And wanting to bring the college into the new age, he found money to bring in a lot of luminaries of the day to speak and lead workshops with us. It was a great time to be there. So in a school that took anybody, I found myself for the first time in my life to be a top-rung student, and things worked out. I got attention I'd not gotten before from teachers, and that made a difference. So I look back, after this long story, at my years of delivering iron hide-a-beds with a certain gratitude. But a person can react in several ways to his or her past, right? And I want to tell you this next story by a man from San Rafael, California, just coincidentally. My father he's telling this story himself. My father, he says, is Dutch and grew up in Indonesia when it was a Dutch colony. His family had a huge colonial-style home filled with expensive antiques and art brought over from Europe. They had cars and many valuable books. My grandfather brought home orphaned tigers, bears, and monkeys to raise as pets, and my father's childhood home was always bustling with beauty. When during World War II the Japanese invaded the islands, my grandfather threw the family heirlooms down the well minutes before the Japanese kicked open their door. Everything was confiscated except for what they could fit into one suitcase apiece. The Japanese sent their Dutch captives to concentration camps where prisoners received 1 cup of rice per day to eat. The women and children went to one camp and the men to another. When my father turned 10, he was sent to the men's camp along with his best friend, who was so heartbroken at being separated from his mother that he stopped talking stopped drinking and eating. And when he died, the Japanese guards gave my father the contents of the dead boy's suitcase. My father was able to trade these toys and clothes for an extra handful of rice a day. He was also able to get bananas from natives through the fence. And when he became weak, he traded the fruit for lighter work assignments. While others died of starvation, my father stayed alive. And when the U.S. troops finally liberated the Dutch prisoners, my father returned to Holland with only the clothes on his back. He later emigrated to the U.S., worked his way through college, married, had 3 children, and bought a large house overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Southern California. My father is now very old. I visited him a few years ago while my mother was on a trip to Europe. And when I opened the cupboard in his kitchen, I found rows of used styrofoam cups, plastic sporks, and neatly stacked fast food French fry boxes. A drawer was full to the brim with corks. I was emptying hundreds of corks into the garbage one day when my father came in and saw me. He flew into a panic and scooped the corks back out. "You wait," he fumed. "One day you'll need these." Exasperated, I shouted. "For what?" "One day you'll need to burn the ends to make charcoal," he said. "So don't come running to me when you have nothing to write with." Thankfully, he says, the young man says, I have never known absolute poverty. The loss of everything and everybody familiar. The sort of deprivation that would make someone hoard corks in a $2 million house. True enough. That's the wheel. It's a hard thing to know absolute poverty, and it's such a sad thing then having to drag a memory like that up the wheel along with you so that you fill a $2 million house with corks. Better than anything is to make friends with the whole wheel, knowing that when you are at the bottom, better days may be ahead, and knowing that when you're at the top, though it won't last forever, you can at least savor the time you're there. Parker Palmer, a wonderful spiritual teacher, defines sin as the twin temptations of despair and pride. You can find them at different places on the wheel. He says we are all too susceptible to falling into pride, thinking we deserve our high station in life, which may evaporate tomorrow, or of falling into despair when our luck may in fact change overnight too. My own life has taught me that he is absolutely right. So one more story. This one's from someone in her 30s who was at the wheel's bottom and found the grace she needed there to deal with some aspects of life at the wheel's top. Something that those born at the top usually can't understand. She writes, "At 26, I wasn't prepared to be hospitalized with lymphoma. Fevers coming and going after my first round of chemotherapy. It was a week of specialists and blood draws. It was also a week of beloved friends and family taking turns sleeping on the rollout cot, helping me pass the long nights full of doubt and fear. Sometimes I was certain I would die. Other times I was sure that the fear of dying itself would overwhelm me. It was June in Washington, D.C., and I was stir-crazy. But my immune defenses were so low I could not leave my little germ-free room on the oncology floor. One night I stood a single step outside the door just to experience a different air, different things to see. And then one day I was released from the hospital. I will always carry with me the intoxicating smell of that humid June day, how I could not get enough of its scent, its heat, its life. I wanted to drink the air and live for a long, long time. 8 years later, I am a resident doctor now myself. I'm sometimes confined for a very different purpose in these white hallways. Whenever someone laments the stifling summer heat outdoors, I remember that day and think what any of us would give for a small breath of precious summer air if we could have it sometimes. So, little about going up or coming down the great wheel of life is in our control. But in the end, the luckiest people are those who, over a lifetime, spend some time at the bottom and some time at the top. Still, wherever we find ourselves at a given moment, the grace of God is fully available to us. And there is a possibility, thinking of it as a big round wheel,